G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. 15th of June. And on the one hand, I'm going to have another go at riding from here to Dundee and back via the loop, as I call it, which should be 52 kilometres, and I'm going to ride that close to full power as I can, depending on road conditions. And ideally, the Seven River Causeway will not be too high for me to cross in the electric motorbike. And I will determine, by doing this, an exact comparison between battery number 1 and battery number 1, and speed controller number 1 and speed controller number 2, so I can find out just how much range I've lost with the changeover, because on the basis of the trip to Deepwater, I've lost 3, maybe 4 kilometres worth of range, as well as 3 kilometres worth of speed, which would make the new speed controller 10% less efficient, and it would mean it doesn't actually meet the specifications in the sales brochure and the manual, and therefore it doesn't actually compare with the one that blew up. But on the other hand, dear leader, the God King Emperor, in the excited status of Norte Armed Americano, has had his grand military parade. 6,000 military personnel showed up in Washington, allegedly to celebrate Flag Day and the 250th anniversary of the forming of the American Army of Independence, to fight the War of Independence, to get away from the King of England, who was governing them, and they were paying taxation with no representation. And simultaneously there were variously described as 2,000 or 5,000 or however many thousand individual no kings rallies all across the country. And relatively small cities apparently had more people show up for the no kings rallies than the God King Emperor was able to muster for the rally of the parade in Washington. And I don't know what Donnie thinks he's doing with his rain dance, but it was the dullest, greyest, gloomiest, doomiest, most sombre, haze-encrusted day I have ever seen anybody attempting to televise. You literally had trouble picking the helicopters out of the clouds as they were trying to fly over the top of the parades, and the tanks were disappearing in clouds of their own exhaust smoke. So yeah, in honour of the occasion, let's make this a Trumpocalypse Chronicle number 18. Okay. Camera's rolling. Get the second gauntlet on. I tried to shoot a video 3 or 4 days ago when President Trump sent his federalised National Guard into Los Angeles in order to quell a protest which was apparently out of control to the degree where 2 individuals had been arrested for attacking the LAPD. I think one of them had thrown a Molotov cocktail and somebody else had done something nasty, but no firearms were involved. And in reaction to that, the American president decided that things were so far out of control that because the governor had not called on the National Guard to save the nature of civilization, therefore Trumpy activated the National Guard, but he didn't activate them under the Insurrection Act. He used a different provision, which is to protect against rebellion in the event of the president not being able to effectively get federal police or federal forces, federal officers, to discharge their duties. So it was a bit of a long stretch of the imagination for his confected excuse to have any meaning. And of course, Gavin Newsom, the Governor of California, immediately contested the federalisation in the federal courts, and the first judge fully agreed with the Governor. And then of course the Trump administration, being what the Trump administration is, they appealed the federal court's ruling, so that's got to go to the appeals court. And everything was starting to calm down. The protesters in Los Angeles seem to have got the hang of the idea that every time you do anything at all that's kind of violent, that merely triggers a huge response from the police forces, because what's apparently going on is the Trump administration is desperately keen to have a rebellion which can then be suppressed. And what was going on in Los Angeles was a direct reaction to Stephen Miller having got the district heads and administrators of the Homeland Insecurity, or the ICE, in his office or in an auditorium, and harassed them because they weren't arresting enough brown-skinned people for deportation. And on being told that all the criminals had already been arrested and deported, he then said, well, why aren't you going to Home Depot and 7-Eleven and car washes and arresting people there? And I didn't see it, but I heard talk of there being video of Black Hawk helicopters low down over the melon fields chasing undocumented immigrants. And then the next thing anybody knew, there was some roofing contractors and long-term Trump voters and they were on the television bemoaning the fact that their workforce of 6 or 8 undocumented migrants who'd been working for them for 10 or 20 years, always showed up on time, never put a foot wrong, worked really hard for bugger all pay, they'd all been arrested. And therefore the roofing contractor was out of pocket. And all the hoteliers had the same story, nobody to bloody clean the rooms or make the bed. And within 12 or 24 hours, Trump was up on his hind legs explaining how we had to use some common sense, because otherwise all of the farmers would have nobody working for them. And Trump suddenly realised that not having a piece of paper and being in the country for 20 years did not make you a bad thing in the eyes of the community. So I'm assuming there's a power struggle going on there. Possibly one of the most pertinent observations I've heard is that the Trump administration is behaving in ways that dictatorships behave when they are losing power. The only real question at the moment is, how far will Trump go in his impersonation and his intention of following Ceausescu? And I really don't know. He's already performed the takeover manoeuvre when it comes to ICE arresting a quota of 3,000 brown-skinned people per day by showing up and harassing otherwise law-abiding members of the community. As in people whose only infraction against America's laws was entering the country without proper paperwork. Once they got there, they've stood in a neat straight line and worked their little arse off and done everything they could to be as good an American as they possibly could imagine, as anyone could possibly imagine. So just as Donnie's trying to juggle the simultaneous facts that he's incredibly unpopular. Apparently he used to think that immigration and deportation was his strong suit. But as at 2 days ago, when answering questions regarding specific items like how do you feel about ICE running around in military uniforms wearing masks with no identification? 85% of the population disagrees with it. They disapprove of it, they don't like it. How do you feel about people who've got no criminal record and no outstanding matters being picked up and deported merely for being undocumented? Employed people, leaving behind young children and families. Again, something like 86-87% of the population disagree with it. How do you feel about federalising the National Guard to put them into Los Angeles to protect the ICE agents, unidentified with, you know, no name tags, masks on their faces, while they arrest anybody on the street who doesn't actually have their citizenship papers or their passport with their resident visa on their person at the time? How do you feel about that? Again, over 85% of the American population said they don't like it. This morning's news when I woke up, some crazy fat white individual wearing a white 10-gallon Stetson hat is wanted for the politically motivated assassination of a Democratic senator, I think, don't know whether it was senator or a congressman, but shot the lady and shot the lady's husband, killed both of them, went on to shoot another Democrat lawmaker and that bloke's wife, both of whom are in hospital, having emerged from surgery, and hopefully they'll recover. That was in Minnesota. So yeah, the party of law and order, Trump's mob, they might not be anti-abortion fanatics, but the anti-abortion fanatics are shooting Trump's political opponents. Because apparently the bloke's car was fully equipped with a list of all the other people he wanted to shoot, and they were Democratic politicians, people who are organising the No Kings protest, and people who were in favour of individual choice and women being given access to healthcare, in the sense that if they needed an abortion, they should be allowed to have one. I don't know if that was a different mob to the ones who think that if they want an abortion they should have them, but you know, the various gradations and shadings of who's in favour of what and how cranky they are getting a bit beyond me. And then on cue, 3 days after the White House told every American to get the hell out of Iraq and Iran and Jordan, I think it might have been Syria too, the Israeli Air Force launched something in the order of 200 fighter aircraft with whatever air-to-air refuelling support they could muster, and they preemptively struck at the Iranian chain of military command
the Iranian nuclear physics intelligentsia, the people who were working towards putting together either a rinky-dink electric power generating nuclear station and or a whole bunch of nuclear warheads to stick on the ballistic missiles, which Iran's got pretty good at building. So they all got hit in the first night. Iran had an impromptu effort at launching a couple of hundred drones at the Israelis, and only a couple of them got through. The Israelis followed up by attacking the Iranian oil tankers, the oil processing refineries and tank refineries, and the Iranians have attacked the Israeli natural gas processing facility. Or I might have that one backwards, but yeah, they're going after each other's energy grids and networks, pipelines. I don't know what's happening in Iraq because they get to sit underneath it and watch the missiles go crisscrossing over the top of their heads. And of course, the Israeli population who gets fed possibly the most one-eyed, skewed, partisan, propagandised news feed anywhere on the planet, just as they have no idea why the people who live in Gaza don't like the Israeli Defence Forces. They don't understand why there's anything wrong with the idea that Israel has decided, after living on the shores of the Mediterranean for 80 years, that they cannot tolerate the idea of any of their neighbours having any kind of a military force that's capable of smacking Israel down any time Israel decides to expand its borders arbitrarily. So therefore Israel's decided on behalf of all of humanity to just attack somebody else's facilities preemptively, because Israel held fears that Iran might one day attack Israel if Israel ever did anything to piss off the Iranians. And it's kind of got to the point where I'm expecting fearful selfishness to meet inexorable karma. Now, that means uncovering a bit of a can of worms, because a lot of people have the idea that there's nothing wrong with defending yourself, and they feel they are fully entitled to train with weapons and without, so that in case of attack they may better conduct a lethal self-defence against whatever they fear might do them harm. So all the effort that's put into self-defence is necessarily ipso facto per se pointed, aimed and oriented around assuaging their own fear, their own perception of their own weakness, their own perception of their own vulnerability, their own perception of being surrounded by people who want to do bad things to them. They don't have to have any evidence, they just react to the possibility. Got a couple of things to say about that. On the one hand, as far as I'm aware, every theology and every military ideology on the bloody planet vows and swears and declares and teaches and preaches and proselytises the idea, and I'm quoting here, that there can be no greater love than to lay down one's life so that others might live. So when there's half a dozen youngsters in a bloody foxhole and someone lobs a hand grenade in there, and 5 of them cower against the wall of the trench hoping not to get chewed up too badly, and one of them lays down on top of the hand grenade to try and smother the blast so that all their mates are going to survive, the one who lays down on the hand grenade gets the Congressional Medal of Honour or the Victoria Cross or whatever shining tinned metal trinket dangling on its watered silk ribbon with which I lead men to their deaths by the thousands, nay, by their tens of thousands, unquote, said Napoleon Bonaparte, regarding medals with which he used to decorate his patriotic army, which was Napoleon's two signal contributions to the artistic science of warfare. He invented the patriotic army because 100,000 farmers, labourers who were unemployed and told to come and march over the horizon would beat the living shit out of any 10,000 hardened, seasoned professionals who'd spent 20 years training to be good at hacking and slashing after firing their one shot with their muzzle-loaded musket. So, it's the laying down of one's life that others might live which is the honourable thing. Just get out of earshot of that bloke on the causeway. But the idea that sacrificing one's own life for the benefit of others is the ultimate in selflessness, and the ultimate in being selfless is the most honourable, the bravest, the most courageous thing that anybody could do. I accept all of that. I embrace the concept ideologically and philosophically and spiritually and faithfully because I like equations. I'm not much for mathematics, but I do like equations. And that's an equation, you see. If sacrificing one's own life is the bravest thing, the most courageous and noble thing you can do in terms of being selfless, then the most selfish, the most craven, the most cowardly, the most dishonourable thing that anybody could ever want to do would be to kill somebody else out of fearfulness on account of what the coward imagines their victim might perhaps possibly maybe capable of doing and perhaps maybe want to do to the craven fucking coward one day. If perhaps maybe. When Germany attacked Poland in a preemptive attack to save all those fucking Panzer tanks from the wicked depredations of the cavalry waving their sabres, that was a preemptive attack in self-defence. I would submit that maybe because the book of God theories to which I subscribe suggests that there is no true sin or Satan other than selfishness, I would suggest that wanting to kill anybody for purposes of self-defence, particularly preemptively based on your own fear of what might happen one day perhaps, 86% at 13 kilometres. Now that's absolutely fucking disgusting. Now last Sunday was the Queen's birthday, public holiday, King's birthday. Not used to having a king. And it was a Sunday. Now where I live, my next door neighbour had family who lived out at Pinket. And pretty much every Sunday, my neighbour and his missus would jump in the car and they'd go to town. I don't know whether they'd go to church on the way, but they'd go out to Pinket to spend the Sunday with their family. And that meant that it was not unusual for people to be on neighbour's place shooting on a Sunday, particularly on long weekends or public holidays. So last week I heard some gunfire on the neighbour's driveway. Wandered down to the front gate of my place and stood behind the front gate post and had a look with binoculars. A couple of strangers I didn't really recognise, 2 strange vehicles, a lot of blokes standing around either smoking cigarettes or sucking on vapes. And I'm just watching them to see what they're going to do and whether they're shooting at feral animals or my neighbour's bloody livestock. And after a while, they noticed that I was up there. I got my 10-power binoculars on them, and I don't know what power their telescopic gun sight was, but I was looking backwards down their gun sight through my binoculars. And it wasn't scary because I could see the position of the bolt handle, and I knew that he was looking at me through open bolt or through a telescopic sight. And he had the bolt open. He was just using his telescope to see what the hell I was doing. Now, I'm pretty bloody sure that there's a lot of places in America where if one person sees another person point a firearm at them, that's pretty much justification for the person who's standing at the pointy end of the gun sights to whip out their own firearm and commence duelling. I just watched the fella, and after a while he waved his hand at me and I waved my hand at him and figured, oh well, he knows he's been seen. And I wandered back to my place and put the kettle on and rang up my next door neighbour's answer phone and told him that there was somebody shooting on his driveway and their car's got such and such written on the side of the door. One of them just looked at me through his gun sight for about 30 seconds or so, which was not particularly friendly. But it wasn't scary either because his bolt was open. Maybe 10 minutes later I had both the fellas walking up my driveway to ask what I'd been looking at and why I was looking at them. Now if either they had been terribly frightened individuals or if I had been the sort of person who takes offence at shit, instead of ringing up the landholder and telling him that there's someone shooting on your place, and they know I've been looking at them because we looked at each other through our opticals. If I had rung the bloody police and said, oh, someone's shooting on my neighbour's place and they pointed a gun at me and looked at me and boo-hoo and sob, I could have fucked up a lot of people's day with paperwork over paranoia. And if they had been the sort of person who thinks, oh, who's that fucking hippie groony up there on the hill looking at me with binoculars, I better fucking put a round over his head and make sure he doesn't fucking say anything, that would have fucked up the whole day as well. They were being reasonable and I was being reasonable. We had a pleasant kind of a conversation, They got a surprise that I'm not a dickhead. I got reassured that they're not going to shoot my next door neighbour's livestock and they're not going to shoot the bloody wildlife. What I should have said was, if you're in hot pursuit of pigs and they go through my boundary fence, for Christ's sake, don't stay at the fence. Follow the friggin' pig. It'd be also nice if they'd, give me a text message before they start shooting on my neighbour's place so I know to expect the gunfire. But, even with people with guns, even when they're pointing them at you, you don't have to panic and freak out. You can work shit out. And most of the time, all of your worst case scenarios and possibilities are all in your own fucking head. And if you violently react to your own fearfulness, you can make everything a hell of a lot worse. Now in the case of the Israelis and the Iranians, well, my personal belief is that the people who were in charge of Hamas 3 years ago, when they put in their exceptionally daring elite commando raid behind enemy lines back into their own occupied homeland, trying to basically raise the world's consciousness as to how terribly desperate they were feeling, they killed 1,200 Israelis, give or take, might be 1,250, and they kidnapped a whole lot of Israelis to hold as hostages. And they were doing that because they wanted to make their lives get better after 80 years of having been dispossessed in their own homeland by a bunch of people who were being exported from Europe. Because at the end of World War II, the rest of the Europeans, for some reason, said to the surviving Jews who made it through Hitler's 12-year Third Reich, the Europeans said, oh, you aren't going to want to live here with us Europeans anymore, are you? And the Jews looked at him and thought, well, actually, no, probably not. And the Europeans said, good-o, we'll subsidise you to go away somewhere. Why don't you go to Palestine, British-mandated Palestine, and you can all go and live there on a patch of land which has no oil and bugger all the water. And it didn't matter to the Europeans what the Palestinians thought. The Europeans were in the habit of going wherever they wanted to and waving their guns around and telling the local yokels to shut up and piss off and get used to it. And they presumably honestly believed that the countries neighbouring Palestine were going to get used to the idea of the European Jews calling themselves Israelis and moving into the district. But it's never really worked out that way. And what's worse is the agreement which was forced on the Palestinians in 1947-48 as to how much of the country was going to be theirs has been trashed and trampled, partly because the bloody Arabs, in their fearfulness and their self-defensiveness, they immediately declared war on the baby state of Israel, and the people supplying Israel with arms had greater pockets, greater reserves and greater experience than the people supplying the Arabs with arms. And after the initial attempt to drive the Israelis into the sea, every time the Arabs and the Israelis have gone to war, Israel has finished up on the winning side, and they've always finished up on the winning side because they've been using American supplied arms, initially French as well, but gradually over the years the rest of the world has become ever more sceptical of the righteousness of the Israeli side of behaviour. And I think the point of the October 7 attack 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago, Hamas was attempting to provoke Israel into demonstrating to the rest of the world just how viciously selfish and self-entitled and sanctimonious and self-righteous the government of Israel thought was okay for it to be. And yeah, they've done that now. South Africa has taken Israel to the World Court for genocide, for running an apartheid state. Israel has demonstrated that in their opinion, one Israeli is worth 50 Palestinians because they've killed over 50,000 Palestinians in vengeance to get even with Hamas, who's been bombed out of existence because Hamas killed 1,200 Israelis. They are behaving as if the fairy story told to them by their grandparents concerning how the one, only, true, universal creator, Godtheory, maker of heaven and earth, of all things seen and unseen, actually loves one tribe, one religion, more than everybody else on earth and on any planet anywhere else in the universe. And if anybody else raised their children to believe that, they'd be bloody locked up. But that's what Jewish people have been teaching their kids for 5,000 years, ever since they were kicked off their land and captured by the Babylonians and used for slaves before they escaped the fall of Babylon and then got captured by the Egyptians and used as slaves. And like, it's their ancestral poor, poor, pitiful me routine. Whoa, it still goes. That was a bit scary. Yeah, so I think globally there should be a prohibition against anybody trying to teach their offspring that it's okay for them to ignore any rule or law made up by anybody outside their tribe, because Gott mit uns, the universal creator God theory, loves us and our tribe and our family and our nation and our district and our state much, much, much more than anybody else on the whole planet. We are God's chosen race. But that is what the Israelis, or the practicing Jews among the Israelis, tell their kids. I find it offensive, and I suspect that if that's what you grow up believing, and you sort of walk around looking at the rest of the world as if they're mere decorations put there for your convenience because God loves you better, the way you behave might get on your neighbour's nerves, perhaps. I'm thinking this may be why when the Jews run away from Palestine after the Muslims sacked Jerusalem and the Temple of Solomon fell down, and as I understand it, the Jews went to Spain and everybody welcomed them with open arms. Oh, you poor buggers, look, see, you've had to run away, look what the Muslims did to you. Come over here, we feel sorry for you. 200 years later, the Spaniards didn't want to know them and they hunted them out. And wherever they went in Europe, their reputation as not being much fun to live beside preceded them. And that is apparently because humans are not as clever as kangaroos. You can't convince a kangaroo of the principle of collective guilt or of the righteousness of collective punishment. I've had kangaroos appear for breakfast with a bleeding bullet hole in their ear at 6 o'clock in the morning, scratching on my door 2 or 3 hours after I'd heard gunfire in the paddock on the other side of the fence, and been hopefully wondering whether that was, you know, strange kangaroos or anybody I know. Hoping it was not anyone I knew. But the kangaroo with the bleeding ear didn't want to tear me a colostomy with his toenail because he didn't want to teach me a lesson of vengeance, getting even to all humanity because somebody else shot at him during the night and almost missed. Yet right now there are Israelis and there are Iranians who are doing their absolute best to assault and injure and hurt and maim and kill each other despite not knowing anything about each other. It's just this bloody tribal desire to hurt the strangers. And all of them claim to have their God on their side. Yet The Muslims claim to be bound by the commandments of Moses, and the commandment is thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. But they're telling lies about each other and killing each other because they want each other's stuff. They want each other's land. They want each other's productivity. Productivity as in squeeze the tit harder and try and make the milk flow faster. "44 kilometres an hour, 45. 25 kilometres distance, 69% remaining." And this is Dundee. I don't think it looks much like Dundee in Scotland, but it is Dundee. And this is a replication of the ride I made on Christmas Day. So anyway, what appears to be going on is a long baseline experiment in liberty and responsibility, free will and consequences. It's also a kind of an experiment in parenting and childcare. Because if you spend generations teaching your offspring a whole lot of bullshit, it isn't their fault if they start out doing stupid crap. But eventually, they're supposed to wake up to themselves. And in the case of the people who are running the world at the moment, most of them have not woken up to themselves. They get to be old men, bitter and twisted, finally empowered to do what they want. And instead of doing what they started out thinking was the right thing to do, they're now doing what they think they can get away with. None of the world leaders appear to me to be behaving as if they actually believe that there's any kind of a overall universal creator God theory who will ever sit in judgment on them and their doings. And hold them to account for stuff they've done that really sort of didn't measure up. So that's 27 kilometres, the actual turnaround point. Or maybe the traffic camera would have been the turnaround point. But the problem is that you get people of the calibre of Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, and they've all been viciously damaged in their infancy and childhood and youth, programmed with a whole lot of absolutely selfish, paranoid bullshit. And when they read a book of laws or a book of theology, they don't look at the plain text and have a look and see, well, what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to behave? What's considered to be acceptable in the eyes of the creator God theory and what's considered to be beyond the pale? Not acceptable. Not allowed to do that. Don't behave like that. They don't look at anything as simple as that. They go looking for a commentary written by somebody else later on afterwards, by reference to which they can try and justify whatever political move they want to make. And then they'll blame that political move on the creator God theory that they say they have faith in. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that's what the commandment to the effect that thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain actually refers. So, in effect, somebody says to you, blah, 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 because God said so. That, to me, constitutes taking the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Anytime anybody tries to refer to the authority of the God theory as their reason for thinking anything, for saying anything, or telling anybody else what not to do, yeah, that's kind of going too far. Might be a whole lot more better if instead of looking at everybody else and telling them what they're not allowed to do, perhaps wait till you're asked and then tell them why you as an individual wouldn't want to do that. You know, I don't tell people you must not shoot wildlife because all these reasons. I basically explained to them, once upon a time I used to shoot the wildlife and I used to eat it. But eventually I got sick of doing it and I couldn't eat the last one that I shot, so I stopped killing things for the taste and the grease, and that's just how I live in my life. And it's a way of getting your point across without making a fucking nuisance of yourself. But it seems to me that there's a hell of a lot of people who've been raised with a silly idea and they've been studious enough, they've applied themselves enough to put those wrong-headed, selfish, frightened, paranoid principles into effect, and they've gone a long way and they've prospered by doing it. And now's the time where they're drawing to the end of the rope, and when you get to the end of the rope, that's where you get the sudden snap that drops your neck. I sort of feel as if people like Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, Benjamin Netanyahu, Rupert Murdoch, they've all been fed enough rope. They've used every rationalisation and justification and excuse they can come up with for why they want to behave like self-centred, greedy, grasping, vicious, avaricious, capricious, self-centred arseholes. And now they've got themselves in a position where they have corporeal responsibility for the situation they're in. They've all got millions of people who are holding them responsible for getting the entire tribe, country, world out of the problem that they have manufactured for political reasons, so that they could claim and bill themselves as being the solution. Now they've just got the fucking problem and they've got to do something about it. I don't believe that Benjamin Netanyahu and his crew of cronies, his clique of bloody right-wing ultra-Orthodox Jews, I don't think any of them have ever considered the idea. Oh look, there's a snake over there. I don't believe any of them have ever paid any attention to the idea that it's okay for them, look at the kangaroo on the horizon. It's okay for them to start a bloody awful war, two of them. I wonder if they're anybody I know. Yeah, three of them looking at me. As I was saying, it's okay for Israel to start a war with Iran, banking on the idea that the US will help defend Israel from whatever missiles Iran shoots back, because that's what they did last time when the Houthis were firing missiles at Israel. And last time Iran fired missiles at Israel, an American destroyer fired off its entire bloody vertical launch system cell worth of surface-to-air anti-missile missiles, what would have been once upon a time anti-aircraft defence. But I don't think Benjamin Netanyahu has based any of his calculations on how Israel can always rely on America to save it, no matter how many Arab nations want to fight. I don't think he's really figured how big an arms deal America has just done with the Arabs. And I don't think he's factored into the equation the minor point that America looks increasingly likely to be on the precipice of dissolving into a 57-cornered civil war. Secular versus religious, blacks versus whites versus Chinese versus browns, Republicans versus Democrats. I think anybody who plans on relying on American manufacturing capacity to supply them with reloads for their weapon systems is bloody dreaming. And meanwhile, the trade war that Trump launched on the rest of the world has collapsed and blown up in his face. He suddenly discovered that the rest of the world can go on trading among itself without reference to America. The US dollar is no longer the international agreed on currency of exchange. The Chinese savings banks and the Japanese savings banks are no longer buying US Treasury bonds. They're buying gold. And even though Trump's had Besant and Lutnick go to talk to the Chinese first in bloody Switzerland, or was it Sweden? Might have been Sweden, and then in Britain, and they've negotiated a back down on the trade tariff business. The Chinese have agreed to sell some rare earths under much tighter and stricter controls, but as far as I'm aware, they're still not yet agreed to sell any samarium. And samarium is an element which, when mixed with niobium and boron, neodymium, you wind up with a high-strength supermagnet which doesn't die in the arse if you boil it. Your average high-strength neodymium magnet, if you take it up to 100, 120 degrees, that's it, it's dead, it's not a magnet anymore. Samarium magnets can cope with a temperature somewhere around that where lead melts. Now, aluminium melts at about 610 to 630 Celsius. If lead is half that, well, without your samarium, it means that all your magnets all over your bloody jet fighter or your electric motorbike or your windscreen wiper motor or whatever it is, they all die at about half the temperature. So it's going to be very interesting to see whether America is capable of manufacturing anything. I don't think anybody in the US has really got their head around how much difficulty they're going to have in holding their society and their culture and their civilization together if the grid falls over. It's really all you got to do. Take the grid out, and then you can't pump fuel from underground Bowsers into police cars. You take the police cars out of a place like America, well, it'd be kind of different if everybody agreed that selfishness and self-defence was the wrong-headed behaviour of a craven coward. But when everybody has grown up for 150 years or so on a culture that celebrates and glorifies and venerates cowardice and spontaneous violence, where the maxim, he who shoots first wins. You grow up in a culture like that, it's all very well until there's no policeman to stop all the dickheads from getting frightened and shooting at each other. So it'll be bloody interesting to see what happens over the next 24 hours to a couple of months. If this is what's going on the 14th of June in the excited status, I have no bloody idea where they're going to go in 3 weeks' time for the 4th of July celebrations. Happily, none of the bloody tank crews brought any live rounds to shoot up the reviewing stand. I seriously worried about that, but then I saw Trump conduct a political rally at Fort Bragg to a picked audience. Like, if you had a look at the cap badges on all the red berets who were standing behind him in the reviewing stand, they came from a selection of different units. They were not all from one unit. Presumably they'd been pre-selected to be loyalists to Trump. But as I've said in previous Chronicles, ever since Trump was in power the first time, so we're talking 8.5 years at this point, because Biden was too stupid to bloody do anything to stop it. Every television screen in every public access area, in every military base owned by the US Department of Defense has been hardwired, lock-tuned to Fox. So everybody who's been in the military in America for the last 8 years has been saturated and marinated and indoctrinated with Fox News propaganda. The only US military personnel who can be relied on to remember what the Constitution had in it are those who got out more than 9 years ago. And that's a kind of a scary thought. A lot scarier for Canada and Mexico than it is for me in Australia, but it's still a pretty scary thought. 51% at 37 kilometres. And coming down that hill in stage 2 regenerative braking has slowed me down enough for the corner, but it did not put as much as 0.5% into the battery capacity because we're still at 51. Pretty sure last time I did this run I came back on 33%. Whether I can get home on 33% again will tell me, yeah, don't fucking give me any road until you actually get around the corner and see me, eh? I like the philosophy on country roads like this of always riding as close to the middle of the left-hand lane so that if I see something like that, suddenly I haven't got to move. And if I have got to move, you know, it's only a little way, because on a bumpy road, you can't actually swerve suddenly. You can get out there on the edge of the road and you can maintain the edge, but you can't swerve and correct with any degree of certainty. And full speed is now 43 kilometres an hour. So, to all my American subscribers, all I can say is go to the bloody No Kings rallies, but remember, do not throw stones. Don't take a gun. Don't take a knife. Don't take pepper spray or mace or anything else like that. Don't have anything on you that could be classed as a weapon. Do not engage in any kind of aggressive activity. If you're being arrested, go limp. make the bastards carry you. And just remember, as soon as the protesters start fighting back, that's when the forces of oppression think they've got an actual enemy. And that's the thing I've never seen, a pedestrian on the bridge. .37 watt hours per kilometre, 49%, 43 kilometres an hour coming up the hill, 40 kilometres into the ride, dropping down to 41, still at 37 watt hours. Yeah, you do. If you're going to go to one of the rallies, you've got to accept the fact that you'll probably be gassed with tear gas, you'll probably be pepper sprayed. It's likely that you're going to be arrested, maybe battened, struck a few times. You could get trodden on, kicked. If you're lucky, there won't be any horses to trample you. And then you'll have some time in the gulag and some paperwork. Interesting that it was the right-wing MAGA-tards who spent the best part of 10 years claiming that the Democrats were going to use the FEMA camps to lock up dissidents. I'm pretty sure that's where the MAGA-tards are going to put anybody who disagrees with the God King Emperor. But the point is, if all the protesters refuse to go along and just sit down and go floppy, make the bastards carry you. It's not going to be too long before Trump discovers that perhaps 20% of America actually fully agrees with his own warped, twisted, selfish little view of the world. Somebody's been playing golf. It's a bit funny, I mean, unless they live at Rangers Valley, I would have thought if it was anybody at Emerville, they'd be going to the Emerville Golf Club. Must have been a tournament on or something. So yeah, I predict that anybody who starts attempting a Second Amendment solution by shooting at the police is going to get turned into mincemeat, strawberry jam, red steam. The people who are loyal to Trump have fully embraced the idea that when you got them by the balls, their hearts and minds are bound to follow, and peace through superior firepower is the winning strategy. They believe that because they are those of little faith. They cannot imagine any universal creator God theory that's actually complicated enough to keep track of all of the decisions made by everybody. All fucking 8 billion of us on this planet. As far as they're concerned, no God theory could ever be that interconnected, that complicated. So their next step is to decree personally that there is no God, therefore they can get away with whatever they're clever enough to dream up and put into effect. So Trump thinks he can do whatever he likes because nobody's going to stop him. There's only the bloody courts, and there's only the Congress, and there's only the Senate, and he reckons he can get his way around all of them with bribes and lies and political pressure. Vladimir Putin does not believe that there's a cosmic scoreboard or that he is going to be judged within the cosmic scoreboard effect, and he's got goodie points, free hits awarded to him because of the vicious bloody shithole that he grew up in and the crap that he was taught when he was an infant and a child, but that he's still held responsible for all of the selfish, vicious, capricious decisions that he's made as an adult for the benefit of his own wealth and power structure. He just doesn't believe it, and everything that he does is getting more and more and more difficult for him. It's not ever working out the way he thought it would back when he was dreaming up the plan. Benjamin Netanyahu is in the same fucking bucket. If he was an actually honest Orthodox Jew, he would be trying to live according to the Mosaic tenets and according to Deuteronomy, and there wouldn't be any interest charged anywhere in Israel because, you know, God forbids usury. And there wouldn't be any military because thou shalt not kill, and if you've got any weapons for self-defence, that's blasphemy, that's an insult to the Godtheory. That's behaving in a manner which proves that you do not trust the Godtheory to keep you safe. And let's face it, either there is a universal creator God theory, and anybody who behaves as if there is not is going to find out when their life turns to shit because they can't get away with all of the clever, selfish ideas that they've dreamed up. Or if there was no creator God theory, then arseholes like Stalin would never ever stroke out while planning their fifth purge. Viciously selfish dickheads like Hitler wouldn't shoot himself at 56. As it says in the Messiah's Handbook, Reminders for the Advanced Soul, the mark of your ignorance lies in the depth of your belief in injustice and tragedy. What the caterpillar calls the end of the world, the is calls a butterfly. There is no such thing as a problem without a gift for you in its hands. You seek problems because you need their gifts. And it also says everything in this book may be wrong. That's the fun of comparative theology. You get to make it up as you go along, you pick your own ideas and you try to live them and put them into effect. And if you think it's okay to take whatever you can get away with because God helps those that helps themselves, you can expect to make many trips to the House of Follies and be stood up in the dock and have a whole bunch of outraged people make complaints about you and tell the magistrate what you've done to annoy society, and then you will have to jump through certain hoops, initially made of paperwork, later on made of behavioural constraints, before you're ever again allowed to make decisions on your own behalf. It's just what happens. You get some smarty pants who thinks that they're clever enough to break all the rules and that they're going to be able to get away with it. And they go out there and that doesn't happen for them. Okay. 41 kilometres, 38% remaining. No, 46 kilometres. Yeah, well, this is the same battery performance over endurance as I got the time I did two 46 kilometre rides, which is from my place to the Seven River Causeway, and turn around at the causeway because, oops, there's water on it, and we'd had a fair bit of rain back then and I didn't want to push it by going over the causeway. but I gravely doubt that I'm going to get home on the next 4% of a battery. And that's what I would have to do to pull off an equal performance with the first speed controller with this battery on this ride. And because it's probably getting down to about 10 degrees Celsius at the moment. Last night it got down to 2 degrees, but the battery was in the bunk room, and the bunk room is heated, and the batteries had the heat being fed in under the batteries, and they had the dry rider jacket over the top of them, so the batteries did not get any colder than about 11 degrees last night, although it was 2 degrees outside, or maybe 1 degree. And then I sat the battery in the sun and I let it warm up for an hour and a half in the sunlight before I took it for the ride. So we've even got battery temperature kind of within limits. You know, I've done my best to make sure it's the same now as it was then. But I think this new speed controller, it goes close to meeting the specifications, but it just doesn't quite get there. And as far as I'm concerned, if it's going to be 6% slower and 4% less range, that's wrong. If it's 6% slower, it should be using about 10% less current, so it should be somewhere around 10% more range, not less. I don't understand why it's using more current, but the speed controller's not getting hot, the motor's not getting hot. Where is the current going? Have they used different materials which are less efficient? Because if so, you'd expect there to be more heat to dump. But when I get home and I use an infrared thermometer, laser pointed, there's no difference in the heat of the heat sink on this speed controller to the old one. So that's just kind of a bit weird. Yeah, so meanwhile, I think we were talking about Mr. Putin and his problems before the distraction. He's got a bit of a problem because he's been getting several thousand drones made by Iran. I don't know whether it's per month or per week, but a lot of the drones that Russia has been using on the battlefield and to attack Ukrainian cities, they all come from Iran. Well, if Iran has now declared war on Israel, which I'm pretty sure happened 2 days ago, Iran's not going to have any spare drones to sell to Russia. And that means, as well as having lost something like 15% of his long-range nuclear striking forces, and maybe 20% of the rest of his long-range bomber forces, Putin's now got a lot less drones to throw into it. And in his 3-day special operation, if nothing else, the whole world has learned how much of a pain in the arse it is to get attacked by an enemy who uses drones. And I guess it won't be long before civilian use of first-person visual quadcopters, maybe even all forms of radio-controlled aircraft, will be outlawed by fearful politicians and fearful police and fearful military commanders. And the funniest part of all this fearfulness is that if you do a word search on the New Testament, looking for the most often repeated statements attributed to Jesus, it's fear not, have no fear, there is nothing to fear. 2 words, 3 words, 5 words. Fear not, have no fear, there is nothing to fear. And yet the Pope sleeps behind armed guards because he doesn't trust his God theory to keep him safe from the forces of evil who might have designs on doing him harm in the middle of the night while he's asleep in bed. Armed guards at the Vatican. We believe in one God, the Father Almighty, the maker of heaven and earth, of all things seen and unseen. Armed guards at the Vatican. O ye of little faith. Gott mit uns is an absolute fucking lie. It's a 5,000-year-old lie. The universal creator God theory is not on the side of any political party, not on the side of any king, not on the side of any country or company. The universal creator God theory is the collective conscious awareness of every fucking living thing in the entire universe. It's a Gestalt consciousness. The creative, well, the universal creator God theory is a force that individuals can choose to be on the side of the creator, but no individual can bind the creator to be on the side of the individual. Nobody can go out there and chant ritual words or perform incantations and bind the universe